Welcome to Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Joyous conversations about what the afterlife evidence and modern science combine to tell us is true about our one reality. You have nothing to fear. You are eternal and you are perfectly loved. Knowing the truth changes everything. Now, here's Roberta.
Welcome to Seek Reality. I'm Roberta Grimes, and I'm so happy you're with us today. You can tell I've been talking with our guest ahead of time. I'm in a very good mood. One of my own favorite Seek Reality guests is Mark Gober, and he's with us today for the 10th time. When we first met him, Mark was a recent Princeton graduate and a tennis champion, just as buttoned down, I think, as you can possibly imagine. But he had wandered off the mainstream reservation, and he had discovered the primacy of consciousness, and he just could not let it go, or maybe it couldn't let him go. So he had dared to do the research and to do the writing about it, and he had written a truly wonderful, amazing book, which I highly recommend, called An End to Upside Down Thinking, dispelling the myth that the brain produces consciousness and the implications for everyday life. Mark actually seemed a bit dazed to me at the time by his own discovery with that first book, but it was an amazing book, and the rest is history. His next book was An End to Upside Down Living, reorienting our consciousness to live better and save the human species. You know, he could tell he's a small thinker, right, by these titles. Then came An End to Upside Down Liberty, turning traditional political thinking on its head to break free from enslavement. Oh my goodness. Then came An End to Upside Down Contact, UFOs, aliens, and spirits, and why their ongoing interaction with human civilization matters. An End to the Upside Down Reset, the leftist vision for society under the Great Reset and how it can fool caring people into supporting harmful causes. I love these titles. Then it was An End to Upside Down Medicine. That was his latest one, and why consciousness is needed for the new paradigm of health. And now comes Mark's new book, and he's had to leave the planet at this point. Fresh out this year is An End to the Upside Down Cosmos, rethinking the Big Bang, heliocentrism, the lights in the sky, then there are some dots, and where we live. He left the planet altogether. This latest book will be our topic today, and I have to tell you, my dear ones, that Mark Gober is what I would call, and I say this about really nobody else, he's a genuine polymath. He is one of the extremely few people who can enter a field that is entirely new to him, take it apart, look at all its elements, master its literature, and then approach it and put it together again in a whole new and much better way. There are extremely few people who have the intellect to do that, frankly, and even far fewer of those people who might have the intellect and the range to actually want to spend the time and effort to do that in fact. I love Mark's dedication to this book. He dedicated it to those who are comfortable with three important words. I don't know. I love that. I recommend every one of Mark Gober's books without reservation, that they should be on everybody's bookshelf. If you ever have a minute just to sit and read, you should be reading one of these books. Best of all, every book that Mark ever writes is a flat-out amazing expose of the truth that almost no one else dares to seek and to find. And Jesus told us, seek and you shall find. These books are how you do it. Mark, welcome. I think it's wonderful to have you back with us today. I always love having you here.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Roberta. I always love speaking with you, and I want to thank you for your open-mindedness and your continued support, because I am asking questions that can make people uncomfortable, but I really appreciate that you see that my approach is really just to dig in, and not to say that I know for sure, but to find out where we haven't been told the full truth.
Just everywhere. You have proven with your books that the places we have not been told the truth, there's literally, those places are every single field of inquiry that where human beings ever have looked. The truth is everywhere still to be found because nobody ever has told us the truth, right?
It's quite amazing. Or maybe another way to think about it is that we're given models that sound pretty good on the surface. And there might be a few things that don't quite fit into the model, but that's okay because they're just anomalies. And what I'm finding over and over again as we look into the anomalies, we realize, wow, these anomalies actually blow up the entire model. And we have to rethink things from scratch. And it started for us talking, 6 years ago, talking about consciousness. It was the same thing. Oh, well, Dean Radin ran a few studies that show that we might be telepathic and that there's mind-matter interactions, but don't worry about those. It's the same kind of mentality. When in fact, these anomalies, they can push us to rethink reality completely.
Completely. But you see, we're in kindred fields. I'm just in one little part of a little part of the whole. I've been studying the afterlife my whole life, and I've discovered the afterlife is actually our real life. This is just a little place where we spend a tiny bit of our eternal life. So I've been in a kindred field. That's why I so much resonate with what you're doing. You're doing it to everything. I did it to a little part. So we're the same, basically we're doing the same thing with our lives. I couldn't imagine doing it to everything though, which is what you do, which is why I love what you do.
Well, like you said in the introduction, I'm not sure if I find these topics, but they seem to find me and they pull me. Because when we last spoke, I can't remember when it was. I don't think this was even on my radar, this topic. And I get a few hints, and then all of a sudden, it's all I do all day, every day, for weeks at a time. And then I realize, wow, I think there's another book here. And then I synthesize, and then we're talking again. It's the same pattern.
But I've sort of seen the edges of some of your books. I mean, for example, the cosmos. I mean, where most of the reality I've looked at is in the cosmos. And in fact, I'm now about to do a blog post about the cosmos in a different way, because that's where most of our reality is. And I kind of understand it in a very limited way because that's where we spend eternity. But it's, you look at it from the Earth perspective because that's where we spend our Earth lives. It's the same place. It's just so amazing. I mean, it's obvious the Big Bang solves nothing because what came before the Big Bang? What caused the Big Bang? Solves nothing. Nothing.
Right. Right. But when we think about it, and it took me really this book to really understand the implications of the Big Bang model, because it does a number of things. It sets a timeline for our reality of about 13.8 billion years. And it sets an evolutionary framework for how a human physical specimen emerged, because you need all that time for all the randomness in the universe to occur and you need a timeline for Earth. And it also creates a model that I never even thought to question, which is that the sun is at the center of our solar system and that the Earth is revolving around it, because that all came from the Big Bang. It all emerged from the Big Bang. And what I came to understand in looking at, let me take a few steps back. This book, An End to the Upside Down Cosmos, examines something that I took for granted, and it examines, where are we? We've talked many times, Roberta, you and I, about who are we and why are we here? What happens when we die? These are very fundamental questions. But I always took for granted where we are, because we've been given a model by the astrophysicists, basically, which show Earth as a tiny little speck in a massive vacuum of space, revolving around the sun, actually free falling around the sun at over 60,000 miles per hour, even though we don't feel it, which is a very strange thing when you think about it, because Earth actually does not have a constant motion. It has an elliptical orbit around the sun, as they say, which means that there would be a change in speed. And if there's a change in speed, then we should feel it. So that's strange. And this model abides by what's known as the Copernican principle. So the Copernican revolution was Nicholas Copernicus and then Galileo, which said that Earth is not at the center, the sun is, and we revolve around the sun. It's known as heliocentrism, sun-centered. And that model posits, the Copernican principle is, humans and Earth do not occupy a special place in the cosmos. And even Stephen Hawking said, well, we believe this on principles of modesty. So there was this philosophical preference, which actually sounds very similar to our past conversations, which is, what's the materialist model? Well, we emerged here through random and meaningless chemical reactions. The human being doesn't matter. When you die, that's the end. What I'm now talking about is the cosmological version of it. Oh, you're just on a little speck in a nondescript solar system revolving around the sun, and you're not that important. You're just one emergence in this massive universe. And what really struck me initially was, if looking back at what many physicists have said, including Albert Einstein, Stephen Hawking, they will say that if you look at the observations of things in the sky, you cannot tell whether Earth is at the center or whether Earth revolves around the sun. But what's happened is there's a Copernican principle, which is, well, we're not special. Stephen Hawking says on principles of modesty. Even Edwin Hubble, the famous astrophysicist who basically initiated the expanding universe theory, which led to the Big Bang theory, he thought it would be intolerable for Earth to be at the center. It would be a horror. He used very strong language, which I quote in the book. So what I had to do is really dig around, because this model of heliocentrism, the sun at the center, that is so ingrained. Are there any physicists who are even questioning that? And I found that there are a few. And what they show is these anomalies. Anomalies again. So I'll give you one example. It's a famous one. It's called the cosmic microwave background. And this is something that won a Nobel Prize in astrophysics. And I remember when I was at Princeton as an undergraduate, Roberta, I don't know if we talked about this, I thought about changing my major from economics to astrophysics because I wanted to understand this stuff. And I remember learning in one of the astrophysics classes I took about the cosmic microwave background. I didn't ultimately change my major to it, but I learned a little bit about it. And this background radiation is allegedly from the Big Bang. And there are a number of basically images that anyone can see on the internet of what this background radiation that it's behind all of us basically right now, cosmic microwave background. And it is supposed to be homogeneous and isotropic. Homogeneous meaning it's the same basically, and isotropic meaning it doesn't have a preferred direction. But what they're finding in the cosmic microwave background measurements is that there are these anomalies where it's not homogeneous and it's not isotropic.
Right.
Actually, what they've called it now is an axis of evil. That's the term that scientists have used, because these anomalies actually point toward Earth, which is suggestive of, well, maybe Earth occupies a more special place than we thought. This is something we don't hear about very often because the scientists say, well, it's pretty much homogeneous and it's pretty much isotropic, meaning there's not a preferred direction. But there are these little anomalies. They keep finding the anomalies. So I'll just pause there because that alone, I mean, that's just a small part of my book. That alone should really keep the scientists up at night. And isn't it interesting, Roberta, that they call it an axis of evil? It shows a preference of it would be evil for us to occupy a special place, right?
Yes. Yes. That has me grinning. Yeah. Isn't it funny? Oh my word. So many things. That's one of the things I love about your books. They all point to such a bias in science, in all these sort of human-made views of reality, sort of away from the notion that there could be a God, that there could be anything special about humanity. And really, I think that bias is what's evil. It really is. It really is.
And what seems to happen, Roberta, we see this over and over again, is that because there's an entrenched belief system, which comes from the materialist view of consciousness, I think ultimately, that's the foundation of all this. It leads scientists to see new observations and retrofit them into their version of the materialist view, whatever that is.
Very much.
So I'll give another example. One is there's a particle, it's hypothetical, it's called an inflaton, that's supposed to be related to inflation at the Big Bang. Why? Because this would be needed in order to preserve the whole model of the Big Bang and heliocentrism and everything else. The problem is no one's ever found the inflaton, but they speak about it like it's a real thing. So this is an important fallacy. It's called the reification fallacy, where something is spoken about as if it's real, and it reinforces the idea to all of us that it's a real thing, but it's hypothetical. I'll give you another example that's to me critical, and I start my book with this: dark matter and dark energy.
That's the one which really, nearly everything that exists is just dark matter and dark energy. And they can't tell you what it is even now.
Right. So what I hadn't looked into until this book is that, let me take a few steps back in case your audience isn't familiar with this. Dark matter and dark energy, under the current cosmological consensus model, that comprises 96% of the universe, roughly. So that means about 4% of the universe is matter that we can understand. The rest of it is this mysterious stuff. The problem is, just like the inflaton, these things have never been discovered. Neil deGrasse Tyson calls dark matter, for example, one of the biggest mysteries remaining in science. I'm paraphrasing him. But here's how dark matter was allegedly discovered. And the word discover is a euphemism. In 1933.
Made up would be a better way.
Well, you're ahead of me. You're made up. And they say discovered. Well, it was perhaps made up. So Fritz Zwicky in 1933, he was studying the Coma cluster of galaxies. And what he found is that they were moving much more quickly than would have been expected based on Einstein's relativity theory, which is basically the revised version of Newton's gravity, which these are very important theories for all of physics. And all of a sudden, there was an observation in 1933 that didn't match it. But it wasn't just that a little bit off. So according to the fundamental principles of physics,
right.
There should have been 400 times as much matter present, meaning that the observable matter in these clusters was less than 1% of what they would have expected. So what did they say? They didn't say that something's wrong with Einstein's theory or that Newton's gravity is wrong. They said, no, we discovered dark matter because dark matter must be there because relativity and gravity must be correct.
God, anyone? Oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no, couldn't be a God. No. Okay.
And then what happens? So we have a mainstream astrophysicist named Pavel Krupa in Germany at the University of Bonn. He said in an interview last year in 2023, my colleagues and I have spent about 25 years on this, and we have falsified dark matter by more than 5 sigma results. So that means 99.999% accuracy that they have falsified dark matter. So think about the house of cards here. And let me take a few steps back. When he says falsifies dark matter, they're observations that do not fit what dark matter would predict. Okay? So he says we falsified it. And if they falsified dark matter, and if you need dark matter to prop up relativity and gravity, think about what this means. That gravity and relativity are wrong, which means all of cosmology is wrong. And that's not a big stretch. I mean, when I first heard that and thought about it, I thought that's kind of crazy. But if you dig into Newton's gravity, which we all think of as laws, right? Because you drop an apple and it falls to the ground. But what gravity says is that there's something in mass, the mass of the Earth, that attracts the apple downward, and that's why it falls. The problem is that those quote unquote laws of gravity are unable to predict Mercury's motion in the sky. That is acknowledged. So therefore, we have an incomplete model to begin with. And that's just one example. And we could do the same thing with relativity where there are problems. So that means that our basic understanding of motion, which we need to have if we want to understand things moving in the sky, because we all see things moving, including the sun and the moon, our understanding of that's incorrect. So it's making people, I mean, there are not many of them talking about it, which is why I wanted to write this book, to at least to get more chatter, is to say, well, maybe things fall to the ground and move for different reasons. And Richard Feynman, famous physicist, he talked about a downward electric current, basically, that pulls things downward. Some call this electrostatics. And that could explain why things fall down if they're denser. Like an apple's denser than the air, so it falls down, whereas helium gas, it goes up. It might just be some kind of an electrostatic force rather than a force within mass, which is what gravity posits, and then Einstein's relativity posits that. So this is just a little tidbit where we might have to rethink everything.
Yes, but they won't go and do that because they want science to be scientific. They have set up a scientific model which they worship. This is their religion, in a sense. Just like Christianity is a religion, it has certain fundamental principles, their religion does, and they want to worship it. And if you don't follow their religion, then you're a heretic, Mr. Heretic, and you're questioning their religion. It's that simple.
Yeah.
But isn't it time for us to say that plainly and in public? Because the fact that it is only a religion and nothing about it is actually true, because it doesn't hold together as a truth, as a fundamental truth, can bite us in the butt pretty seriously one day when we least can fight the result of whatever that is going to be. And it could be something huge. That's what bothers me about all of this. I mean, we laugh about it because it's so stupid, but the result of this could be very serious. We're living in what might be a very dangerous universe, maybe.
Yeah. Well, we're being taught a model of reality and of the cosmos that is objectively incorrect. The two of us can sit here and show anomaly after anomaly that don't fit the model.
And we can laugh at them because they are so stupid, but it's being inflicted on us by people who are just trying to make a buck and live their lives and put their kids through college and live off their lies to us about what they say is true, when it's not only not true at all. I mean, dark matter and dark energy, which they tell us are true, are something they made up. They're a fudge factor, which is 96% of what they tell us is real, and actually they understand only 4% of reality. 4%. How much is 4%?
I want to read a quote to you, Roberta, because this is very important. Pavel Krupa, who has falsified dark matter, he was asked in the interview that he did in 2023, wait a second, so dark matter was falsified? How could it be that people are still clinging on to this? And his answer was as follows. He says, it has no rational basis. It's probably related to sociological pressures in the community. It's tribal thinking that pulls a lot of young people into an established way of thinking, because that's where they can have a career. That's where the funding is. That's where the leaders in the field are famous. They get prizes, and that's a self-strengthening system in a scientific establishment which relies on competition for funding. That's the whole fallacy of the situation.
Isn't that profound? That is the exact truth. Science is based on this gigantic lie. And he has nailed it. I've known this for 20 years. Why don't these people admit the lie?
Well, what I think might be happening is we have compartmentalization. So in the field of consciousness and the afterlife and psi phenomena, you and I know that this is going on. It's the same thing, where it's hard to get funding to study these things, and the mainstream materialists will say it's all bogus, and there is a sociological pressure. But who's studying that? Really, we're dealing with psychologists, neuroscientists typically, who are pushing back. But now we've entered a different field here. This is astrophysics, talking about the galaxies and the vastness of the universe that they perceive, at least, and the observations that don't fit. So we see the sociological pressures in all these different areas where one scientist might acknowledge it, but there seems to be some umbrella where it's happening everywhere. In our last interview, we talked about medicine and how this is working with the germ theory of disease as well, where we're told certain things and there are anomalies that the medical community doesn't want to acknowledge, sociological pressures. And it happens in these discrete areas, but when you put it all together, we're left with a view of reality that's just incorrect.
It isn't just incorrect, though. This is big time garbage, complete garbage. And and to know it and not to proclaim the lie is to, I just think it's irresponsible to the nth degree. Everybody who is We either proclaim it or we are complicit in it. There's nothing in between.
Yeah. Yeah, and the implications here are, let me bring it to something practical, which is technology and energy. Because a lot of this stuff it sounds like it's cosmological, it actually gets to the fundamentals of physics. And when we start to question that, we realize, wait, maybe there are energy sources that we're not tapping into because our physics has led us astray. And where I want to go with this is the ether, which is known as the fifth element. Throughout history, people talked about the ether, and it was allegedly disproven in the late 1800s with some studies, the most famous of which is the Michelson-Morley study of 1887. The problem is scientists decided to interpret that study a certain way, such that the ether was taken out of physics. But there are other ways of interpreting those results, and I put in the book in chapter 3 many quotes of scientists who acknowledge, wait, it seems that this is true, not the way we've been told. So long story short, I'm now much more inclined to think that the ether is real. Now, if the ether is real, this has big implications for what we've talked about in the past, and it has implications for consciousness, because it could be that this fifth element, the ether, is the background, the substrate of reality. It's what I might think of it as a spiritual interface that takes the non-physical and brings it into form. So what we call matter or even light, we could call those excitations of the background ether.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, this is the sort of thing that like Tesla would talk about, which he was kept in the dark. A lot of his work was not made public. There are many different theories on what happened with him, but there might be forms of energy that we could draw from this ether if we actually studied it. So it's very practical too, to redirect physics.
Directly, right.
Maybe the ancients had it right. They talked about the five elements. And ether was a big part of it. So the more I learn, the more I think, wow, I think we've actually de-evolved. I used to think, well, the old people, the people of the past, they were superstitious. They believed in spirituality and all these other things. But maybe something has happened and we have become more and more in ignorance. And now what's happening is a reawakening to the true nature that was known at some point in our history.
Well, what seems to have happened that I discovered when I was doing a lot of research in the heyday of communication through deep trance mediums was that around just after the advent of the 20th century, the university departments in the peer-reviewed scientific journals freaked out about all the good communication was coming from the afterlife through these deep trance mediums. And they established what they at that time literally called the scientific dogma of materialism. And they established that. They wouldn't let any scientists investigate the afterlife. If they wanted to get published, they could only investigate matter. They couldn't investigate non-matter, anything that was not material. They were afraid of finding God. If you want to know the truth, they were that stupid. And that was, you could find in print the scientific principle of materialism. They could find those words. You can't, after a decade or two, you couldn't find it anymore because Max Planck, who of course got the 1918 Nobel Prize as the father of quantum mechanics, literally said that you can't get behind consciousness. Consciousness is fundamental. And they didn't like that either. Was not okay for him to say that. So they just dug in their heels. And I think that's when, that's around the same time that they were abolishing the notion of ether too, right?
Exactly.
That seems to be when the wrong turn happened, right around the start of the 20th century. There you have it.
And you're reminding me of a principle that I talk about in later chapters of the book, the principle of atomism. The belief that the smallest unit is an atom and that there are subatomic particles that are physical, the proton, the neutron, the electron.
They're actually
and
physical.
I'm finding more and more people, including a theoretical physics PhD. So
the thing is, if you look at an atom, anything that small, and you get inside that, you also find that's not material either, right? I mean, there's nothing that's material.
Exactly. But what you'll hear some people say, and I've said this myself, well, it's 99.99999% empty. but there's a little bit of matter. And now what's happening, like Stephen A. Young, who wrote a book called A Fool's Wisdom, he's a theoretical physics PhD, that even the notion of the electron and these subatomic particles are inferences, that the scientists observe things and they come up with a model that has to be physical in some way. But if we go to Max Planck's quote, you can't get behind consciousness. And that's what all the consciousness science is pointing towards. The notion of an atom itself is problematic. And then that has a ripple effect, because if we don't really have mass, we just have the interpretation of mass. Think about what that means for physics, which is based on physical.
There is no, if you get a camera tiny enough to get inside an atom, there's nothing for it to photograph. The tiniest possible bit of matter is an atom, which is just a vortex of energy. That's just the way it is.
Right. It's like Rupert Spira says, a modulation of consciousness might be another way to put it. That we see these emergences, we call it matter, we call it energy, but really it's the field or the ether that is interfacing with consciousness to show us things. And that just fundamentally changes how we think about everything. And mainstream science is not doing that, whether it's in the field of neuroscience, medicine, cosmology. So what can we do?
It's still trying not to find God, but the joke is on them, because everything that happens is inside God. The big joke is consciousness actually is the creative force. There is no guy with a beard.
Right.
That's the way.
Right. It's an immaterial.
Focus on them, and it's also on the religionists. Everybody, we're living inside God right now.
Right. But we've been redirected. We've been misdirected to believe things that the experts tell us are true. So many of the things that I cover in the book are things that we wouldn't believe if we just trusted our senses. So let me give you another example. And this might be very jarring for your members of your audience to really think about. We are told right now that we are in motion on Earth in many ways. One is that Earth is rotating as a sphere with a movement of 1,000 miles per hour at the equator, which is faster than the speed of sound, but you don't feel it. And at the same time, Earth has multiple wobbles.
Yeah.
It's wobbling in multiple ways, but you don't feel it. It's free falling around the sun in an elliptical orbit, meaning it's not constant motion, at over 60,000 miles an hour. We're moving around the Milky Way galaxy at over 500,000 miles an hour, and we're moving outward in an expanding universe into who knows what at over 1 million miles per hour all at once, and you don't feel any of it. That's what we're told.
I love that. I love that. Say it again. Say it again.
Yeah, so we're rotating on an axis at over 1,000 miles an hour at the equator, which is faster than the speed of sound.
Okay.
Earth wobbles in multiple ways on an axis, tilted. We move around the sun in free fall at over 60,000 miles an hour in an elliptical orbit, meaning it's not constant. And think about the importance of constant motion. Because if you're in a car moving at a constant motion, you don't feel anything really. But if there's anything that's not constant, even a tiny bump, or you change speeds, you feel it. Same thing on an airplane, same thing on a boat. We're apparently doing that around the sun at over 60,000 miles an hour, free falling in elliptical orbit. We don't feel it. And we're rotating around the Milky Way galaxy at over 500,000 miles an hour. And we're moving outward in the universe, because it's an expanding universe, at over 1 million miles an hour, and you never feel it.
Okay. Wow. You make me tired. Wow. Wow. This is a lot of motion.
A lot of motion. And think about the precision that's needed for a surgeon right now. The surgeon's in surgery. You cannot have any bump. Otherwise, it could be life or death. And they're okay.
And he can do that just fine.
He can do it just fine. We can play Jenga. You can stack up, in a game. And if there's any little motion, it would fall. Or you can stack up rocks. And yet, if there's an earthquake, we feel an earthquake.
Isn't that amazing? So tell us now, you've got us all on the edge of our seats. What's really going on in your mind?
In my mind? Well, I think the evidence suggests, and we could get into physics too, which I'm not going to do because it gets really technical.
Well, we're coming toward the end of our time. So because we're going to do this again really soon, because everybody wants to hear from you again soon. So what?
Yeah, the punchline is that Earth is not moving, that we're on whatever we're on is stationary. And the only reason we believe we're moving is because they had to retrofit all the observations of physics to create something where we did not seem like we're special, the Copernican principle. And there's a big bang, we're flying through space, we're flying around the sun, and there's gravity and relativity. All these things are problematic, when in reality, we're actually stationary. And probably at the center, known as geocentrism, which is an ancient philosophy that now seems to be coming back because the observations
And
arguably
we
fit that.
are what doesn't move because we are what is inherently special. That's the big punchline of our conversation. I love it so much. I wish I could hug you, my dear. That's great. Thank you so
Yes.
much for that.
Yeah, it's a big deal. I know that's a lot. If your audience hasn't heard this before, I hadn't either. But if you're interested in my book, I go through some of the science experiments from the 1800s that have been arguably misinterpreted, that assumed and presupposed, well, Earth must be moving. Therefore, we're going to conclude X, Y, and Z, including there's no ether. But what if it's the reverse, that Earth is stationary and there is an ether? I think that's where we've been
There's
misdirected.
actually consciousness.
And consciousness.
And that works so much better. Oh, my word. You know, I loved your book, but I had to skim parts of it. And I will get to read it in its entirety. But everything you write is so readable, so easily readable, which is part of, I think, why it all works so well, because people can understand it. A lot of books which are scientific are not very readable. People think that if they write it obscurely, they're going to seem smarter, but that's the reverse is true. You write so everybody can understand it. So thank you, my dear.
Thank you, Roberta.
So is there any other punchline you want people to take away until we meet again?
Oh boy, there's a bunch of rabbit holes we could go into, but I'll just give one of them. Earth's magnetic field, which is a big deal because that directs us north, south, east, west. It's believed under the current model, it's at the core of Earth, which is about 4,000 miles down, even though we've only been able to dig down under 8 miles. So no one even knows if the core exists in the way we've been told. But what we're told is that the outer core spins around and it generates the magnetic field of Earth, known as the geodynamo effect. And that means we have a magnetic North Pole and a geographic North Pole, and the same thing in the South Pole. That's what we're told, meaning the poles don't line up, and they're actually moving around magnetically because of this geodynamo effect at the core that no one's ever been to or observed, based on a geodynamo effect, which no one has ever replicated in a lab. And this leads us to what's known as magnetic declination, where we have to manually adjust our compasses to get to the right place.
Okay.
Our compasses don't work. So basically, our ideas of magnetism are not correct.
Okay. So we got to work on that too.
That's a big one.
Yeah, we got to work on everything. Oh, my dear friend, Mark Gober. All right, well, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much. Stay where you are because I want to come back and talk with you afterwards. But everyone, we have come to the end of our time. This has been Roberta Grimes, and as you know, you are a powerful, eternal being. You never began, you never will end. And I hope, actually, I hope after today you understand why I say that. Once you understand that a lot of what you've been told by the people you have thought you could listen to, you really shouldn't have been listening to at all. It changes everything in your life for the better. Next week, our guest will be Michael Goddard, who will be with us for the 4th time. Michael is the acclaimed author of several deeply spiritual books, which have won him many awards. And they include A New Now, one of them, Your Guide to Mastering Wisdom Daily. He won 9 book awards with that. And In Search of Lost Lives, Desires, Sanskaras, and the Evolution of a Mind and Soul. And that won the American Best Book Award and a few other awards as well. We're going to be talking with him next week primarily about his new book, which is called The Contentment Dividend, Meditations for Realizing Your True Self. So please be sure to join us next week. I think you're really going to enjoy this. And this week we've been talking with our wonderful friend, Mark Gober, who has been with us for the 10th time, but not the last. I can remember first discovering Mark, and he was, as I say, just this young, preppy tennis player, and he had discovered consciousness as the foundation of everything, but Unlike most people, he couldn't let it lie there. It blew up his life, and I think it's blown up many other people's lives as well. He is a true polymath. When he finds something, he tugs on it like a tugged string, and he has basically blown up everything we thought we knew. I just think he is one of the most extraordinary people I have ever met. I hope, I think I know, Mark is a young man still. He's going to be discovered for the genius he really is. And we're going to help that happen if we possibly can. Every one of his books is something, and I'm going to put all his books into the material for this interview. Every one of his books is something everybody should read. I can recommend them all about really with no reservation at all, because they're easy to understand. And they're going to, not only they're going to rock everything you thought you knew, but I think they're going to help you see how you can put it back together, and you can feel that you've really learned something that you can use in your own life. And as you know, our great friend Craig Hogan is the president and guru of Seek Reality Online. And that's your one-stop resource for all things afterlife. Since your life really is eternal, it's time for you to start learning what you're going to need in the next life and get a head start on that. And of course, teachingsbyjesus.com is your best resource for all the beautiful divine truths that are brought to us in perfect love by the greatest teacher of them all, Master Jesus. He didn't create the Christianity we have now, and you're going to be relieved to hear that. So it's time to start to learn as that Christianity finally dies. It's time to learn what really is Jesus's eternal teachings, so that you can start to build your own best life. And if you want to talk about any of my books, or if you just want to really learn about anything at all, you can always contact me through the green contact block on robertagrimes.com. Just be sure to give me your correct email address. And all of the more than 550 past episodes of the past episodes of this reality. I'm sorry, I'm trying to turn off my phone. It's talking to me now. All of the past episodes of this podcast can be discovered on just about anywhere podcasts can be sold. And also the new video episodes each week are available on Roku, Fire Stick, YouTube, and just about anywhere else. Meanwhile, this has been Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Please enjoy and make the most of this coming week in our one reality, always knowing that you are a powerful, eternal being, and you, most of all, in all reality, you are eternally and beautifully and perfectly loved.
You've been listening to Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Roberta blogs and answers questions at robertagrimes.com. Join us every week as we explore what the afterlife evidence and modern science combine to tell us is true about the one reality we all share. Knowing the truth changes everything.